other than that, just thanks for coming, thanks to our presenters, and as ever, thanks to Gengo for hosting us and being so kind with the space, and David, who usually ends up doing all the chairs and the generous, kind hosting. And with that, I'll leave it to Johan. Thank you.
Okay.
Should we clap?
Thanks, Tom. Come on. All right, it will be good for the video.
We're gonna clap a lot.
Okay, so as you can see from this slide, this talk is called Understanding User Interface Design, and I will make an attempt at talking about the work of a user interface designer, how to keep up to date and improve your skill set, and then if there is time, because I've heard I can only talk 15 to 20 minutes, we will have some small UI discussion. First up is an introduction, and my company is called Mono, and my name is Johan Ronsse, and Mono is a user interface design company. So what this means is you guys are in UI UX, so obviously you know what UI user interface means, but this is kind of the work we do. This is, for example, a medical interface to help nurses in hospitals do their job. And another example of the work we do is this user interface design for an application to display music notation, so you can use it to practice your guitar or piano. We are moving more to work with embedded computers, so think a bit about ATMs or vending machines, think about buying a ticket for the metro or something. That's also the kind of work we do. And there's 3 people in the team. There's Xavier, which is my business partner, myself, and Jan. These illustrations were made by Kuno, a very talented Japanese illustrator. And let's continue. We are a bit geographically dispersed at the moment, so I'm in Japan, but the other 2 guys are in Belgium, so it's quite far, 7 hours time zone difference. But we find that with modern tools, it's not too bad. We can Skype, we can Slack, and it kind of works to do good work. And sometimes there is even an added benefit to having this time zone difference, because I can pick up the work from the other guys on the other side of the world and then hand it off to them again. So on to the real part, the meat of the presentation, which is the work of a UI designer. So I think the work of a UI designer can be divided into 4 main parts. So there's client communication, there's research, design and prototyping work, and developer communication. So first I want to hone in on client communication. Okay, so the first part to client communication is understanding their problem, obviously, but what I find interesting is like trying to understand their domain. So imagine you have a client, they're in aviation or they're in ticketing, they are in a very specific domain, and as you work with them, you become more knowledgeable about their domain. You're kind of becoming like a mini expert in their domain, and you can start thinking along with the business. So that's why we prefer at Mono to have like long-term clients, so we can really get to know them and to think along with the business. As for client communication, of course, as a designer, important skill is presenting your work through a variety of things like in-person meetings, screen sharing, video presentations, and just general discussion on online platforms. But what I find is more productive than just like posting the design and like asking the client like, what do you think? I found collaborative design is very important, to draw together, to sit in a room together, and to really like get that business information out of the client. So I've had the most productive design sessions just like sitting with 2 of the most important stakeholders together at the client's office and just drawing and like making a mock-up. It can be very rough, it can contain just some notes, the comments that they make, and just some very rough mock-up, but then you get to a kind of point where you're looking at the same thing and you're kind of drawing the same business conclusions like about what it should be. So at this point your design is already validated. The only thing you really have to do is then refine it by yourself and then represent it, but at this point there is already agreement to what you're gonna build. So it's just proving that the idea is valid or not, and then you can continue. Like, as you know, design, it's a feedback loop, so it just repeat. I find that there's a bit of a fight between having a slick presentation and a working demo. So for my work, I like to have kind of the real UI to show. So actually not a presentation like this one, but just I open my drawings or I open a prototype and start talking. But I find that it's not always possible to make a prototype, so we'll see some of these prototypes later. It's not always possible to make like a fully interactive prototype because it requires a lot of coding work. So there's kind of this balance between how much you're developing to trying to get to a prototype and to show your idea. So recently I started experimenting more with After Effects, and you can see, for example, here it's kind of a basic interface. There's a more advanced one, but I can't show it because I signed this big NDA with the client. But the idea is just that you make the frames and you make the animation in After Effects, but it kind of allows you to fake really advanced things like a rotation in 3D space or some kind of things that you can't do with like basic image prototypes, that then allow you to communicate the idea to the client. So the main work as a designer you are doing is design and prototyping work, and of course it all starts maybe with sketches, which then evolve into wireframes, and at the end, or not really at the end, but the wireframes evolve into visual design. We use the common design tools, Sketch and Illustrator at Mono. So these days Sketch is really popular. I guess who uses Sketch? Because most people switch to Sketch, but I find that the vector drawing tools in Sketch are not really good, so I use Illustrator for the vector drawing and then import to Sketch back and forth. It's a bit messy, but it seems to be the best way to do it. And I'm glad there's some competition in the space. There's some things happening, like recently, last month, Adobe released a new version of Photoshop that kind of copied the artboard features from Sketch, and then they also made a whole new way to view Photoshop. So it's kind of like Sketch, where you have a more basic interface, so you can set a different mode in Photoshop where you have really this kind of more basic interface that's more used for UI design and not for photography as Photoshop originally was intended for. And there are also other tools in the market now, like Affinity Designer. It just released a few days ago. I'm not sure if it's really good, and I'm not sure if I can make the effort to switch to another application, but I'm happy that there's some competition in the design space and there's some things happening, because for years it felt like nothing was really happening there. So on to prototyping, which is kind of my favorite. So there's different types of prototypes for me, or how we work at Mono. So the basic prototype, I'm hesitant to really call it a prototype because it's just a bunch of images chained together. So you know these apps like InVision or Flinto, where you can chain images together, you can make hotspots, and then you can link one image to the other, maybe add an animation. There's also Keynote that we use for kind of prototypes, and there's the special one, which is kind of like our specialty at Mono, which is the full HTML CSS prototype. So it's kind of like an interactive version of the application built with HTML and CSS, but not really production ready, just good enough to show the client what it needs to be. Also another type of prototype which I like is just a small UI demo. So oftentimes you need to explain like a concept that is maybe known to a UI designer but not really to the client. So for example, maybe scroll snapping or or a web technology that works in one browser and not in another. So you can easily do it by making a little code pen is a site that I use, where you can just make a HTML CSS snippet and then share it with the client. So to make it a bit more visual, Flinto is mainly used for iOS prototypes, and as they do on their site, I'm not sure if this is working. It doesn't display on the TV. So old school way, connecting screens visually and updating screens as you go, kind of the basic tools to link images together. And then InVision app, which I think is the most powerful one for more like desktop type work, where you also chain images together. But I couldn't manage to make like a good screenshot of their marketing site because it's kind of weird. But the app itself is much better. So what I'm talking about when I'm saying like a small UI demo is just this. So it's only a single HTML file, CSS file, just to show like a basic interaction. So this is a way to add an item in a medical app that we were making. So it's just like a micro interaction, and I find that either HTML, CSS or Framer is the best tool to make these things. But a fully interactive prototype is more like this. This one is a bit bare bones because it's kind of our starter prototype, but it gets the idea across, so it's not very visual at the moment, but to show like the type of interactivity we can show the client with this is kind of like, okay, there's a popover, there's a modal, you can change from screen to screen, and we kind of have a toolkit at Mono to kind of build these administrative user interfaces fast, and this is kind of the common user interface that occurs all of the time in interface design work. So there's this, not really a graph, but this slide shows the design fidelity over time. So you're starting with a sketch, then you go on to wireframe, visual design, and then in the end there's a prototype. Then it goes to development. Now I find that I'm still in search of the right tool, because to show good animation in interface there's a lot of tools available at the moment, like there is Framer, Quartz, Composer, there's all kinds of tools, but they don't really work together well with design tools. So I'm finding that there's some need for innovation in this space. So if anyone can make a sketch for animation, please, it would be very welcome, because right now you're kind of exporting PNGs to one application, then coding things up, and then going to another application. It's kind of cumbersome. So the irony is that the tool that did all of this right was Adobe Flash, but yeah, it's not really in use or getting updated at the moment. But it was kind of a good tool for this kind of thing. So the next part of the talk is about keeping up to date and improving your skill set. What I find that is very important as a designer is your platform knowledge. So kind of we are hiring someone soon, and my test to see if they really know their stuff is to test them on operating systems. So there's Windows 10, which is coming up, and like I think it doesn't get enough attention as it is, so that's why I'm featuring it now. So I've been testing the Windows 10 betas, and you can freely download them from the Microsoft website. And if you're using a Mac as your main computer like me, you can just use Parallels and run the latest versions. And it's interesting to see how the UI evolves over time. There's always new builds to check and new things that happen in the UI, and I've started making like a kind of user interface kit that we could use internally at Mono, and maybe I will just put it online with the different UI elements in Windows 10. But I find that it changes every release, so it's hard to keep up. I've also tested Microsoft Surface, so I tweeted like I'm thinking about buying a Surface, and then Microsoft Belgium sent me a Surface to test, so that was very kind of them. I find that it's very important to really test the hardware, so you can't just test the OS on an emulator or something. You have to test the hardware and you have to really like see it in its context. So I see people like designing apps for Apple Watch just using the emulator, or there's Android, people making Android apps, but they don't really use Android as their main phone. That's the next topic. Just one thing I wanted to mention is that there's a good YouTube channel called WinBeta, where you can kind of see the evolution in the user interface. So they have these short videos of 10 minutes every time that Microsoft releases a new build of Windows 10. It's kind of geeky, but if you're a UI designer, it's probably interesting. So I was talking a bit about Android, and a few years ago I bought a Nexus 4 Android phone to kind of test the thing, test it and test the Android. I don't know which version it was at the time, I guess Android 4. And now they're kind of doing new stuff. They call it material design. It's with a lot of funky animations and a lot of different colors, and I think it's very confusing. So I'm on the lookout to buy a new phone, an Android phone. I'm using an iPhone right now, but I will have an Android phone just to be able to know the difference. But if you read Google's guides, it's kind of confusing. Like it's kind of like an engineering manual for design instead of really a design guide. So for example, this page talks about the elevation of the different UI elements, and then they have this whole graph that displays like a dialog or a modal picker. It has this Z index or Z index, and they're kind of trying to engineer their way out of design or into design. I don't know how to describe it, but the thing is that it's not really science design, and to put this in a graph is more complex than just displaying a few screenshots with UI elements and their respective shadows. So it's really weird. Like when you start reading what is material design and you're interested, and then you come across these animated GIFs that seem to be made for the purpose of like having a flashy website, it's kind of weird. They also have a whole website called Google Design, but it's really offensive, I think. Because, for example, there's this video called Palette Perfect, a little rusty on your color theory. Material design makes color easy. And then they have this video explaining that you don't need to be able to choose colors as a designer. You just choose the 8 or 16 colors that Google gives you. I just think it's super weird. Like the whole thing is aimed at developers having a better baseline of design instead of really doing what it should be. So I'm applauding Google for doing these efforts to bring design to the foreground, and I think Android 4 and Android 5 looks much better than what it used to be with Android 2. But the way that they communicate design is really weird, I think. So comparing that to Apple, which has forever had good resources on how to make good user interfaces. For example, this is from the Human Interface Guidelines, which is kind of this is from the OS X version, and this is from the iOS version. So this is kind of like a tome, a big 300-page guide on how to do design for their operating system, and that's kind of how I like it. And they're not new to it; they have been doing this forever. So this is for Mac OS 7 or OS 7 at the time. So it was also, this was a PDF you can find on the internet, but actually I find that like if I just read the design advice that they are saying is still relevant today. Like here they're talking about like using the full clickable space for a label, and they're talking about the placement of primary actions in modal dialogues. That's kind of like basic UI that still gets done wrong by so many people today. So it's funny that this 1992 Apple guide is a better design guide than the material design guide from Google. So in the subject of keeping up to date with your platforms, there's also a new beta program by Apple that you can sign up, and then you can have iOS 9 or the newest macOS version on your devices. I don't have time to go in all the details, but there's also a Windows variant of this. So there's a website designed UWP apps, which is Universal Windows Platform, and it's about designing for Windows 10. And what Microsoft wants is that it uses Windows 10 from your phone to your TV to your laptop. Like everything is Windows 10. So you're kind of making a responsive application that scales from phone to TV to everything. It's kind of ambitious and interesting. I'm not sure if it's really gonna work, but it's worth looking into. But for me, that was about platform knowledge. For me, what is more interesting than all these typical desktop operating system is embedded computers. So I call it embedded computers. I don't really have a good name for it, but it's kind of like the computers you encounter in real life. Like we were in Rome or in Genoa and buying a train ticket. So it's kind of like this kind of device. It can make or break your day. Like if it's good, you're on time and you're a happy person. If it's bad, like your whole day is ruined because you're late and you miss everything. I also, if you're interested in like other types of UI, just not only Windows and iPhones and the typical UI, but more like embedded devices, Japan is a great place to be, because you can go to the store and you can fiddle with the devices forever and they won't kick you out. So it's great. So this was taken in the Ginza Center in the Sony Center in Ginza, so it's a really nice place. You can like check out the latest devices, and you can hold 4,000 euro, or I don't know what is equivalent in yen, but you can hold really expensive cameras and they don't really care. Like you can play with them for half an hour and they won't kick you out. So in Belgium they're all like in plastic cases and you can't ever use them, so it's a bit different and it's nice. When I first came to Japan, I started blogging about the different user interfaces in Japan. So this one is from Genki Sushi, and you can think that it's kind of like dated in terms of graphic design, but I find it just very interesting that there is a machine like this in a sushi restaurant. The Benjamin who arrived published some of these articles on his blog called Design Made in Japan, and it's a website that features well, like the title says, Design Made in Japan. So this article is about the design of the railway, the kind of I guess everyone has seen this. If you're on the train, like how long does it take to get to the other side? But I've been analyzing some of this stuff, and I think it's interesting. So the way you learn or the way you keep up to date or get better as a UI designer, it's not always about to learn about UI itself. Sometimes I find there's some side things that kind of let you know more about UI without specifically talking about UI. So for example, there's an interesting book I found, Joel on software, and it's a developer kind of guy turned business guy. Some people might know Fogbucks or Fogreek. Is a very famous programmer, and he wrote his book Joel on software, which is kind of like about the software process, managing developer teams, and like how software is maybe how it gets to be so late, or how it gets to be so much work to make software. So it gives you a good view of the other side, like the developers that you hand your design to. So that's interesting. The most interesting UI design blog is this one. It's Ignore the Code. So it's I think it's Swiss German who writes about UI design, but in a really detailed way. So recently he wrote about the split screen, which is kind of like a new feature on iPad, and how it compares to Metro and Windows split screen. So if that's kind of like your niche, what you're interested in, which is for me really the case, then this is the blog to be. You don't need to write down any of the resources because they will all be on the end of the slides and on our website. I find that as a UI designer, you also need to know a bit about hardware. So recently I tore down my MacBook to put in a new 1 terabyte SSD. And I think just what you need to understand is how a computer works. So kind of when you're clicking a button, what's gonna happen? So why is it slow? Why is it not slow? You kind of have to understand what's going on in the background. Conference talks are a great source to find information, and my favorite conference talk is from a few years ago. It's called Inventing on Principle, and it's a guy who used to work for Apple. His name is Brett Victor, and he shows that we kind of need better tools to do our design work. So in this thing, he's showing that he wants to animate a leaf falling down, but to animate it by mouse is really hard. So he made an app. Well, he's a good programmer, so he can do that, but he made an app for the iPad to kind of animate the leaf by hand and then record the movement to make his short movie. So the idea that you need to improve your tools to do better design work, it really like hit me or struck me as very important. Developer conferences are like not the best way to get up to date on UI design, but it's always interesting to check if they had design sessions. So Microsoft and Apple, they have their and Google obviously have their developer conferences. And if you go to the schedule, sometimes you can find some design sessions. Like it's a bit limited for WWDC. There have been like 2 or 3 design sessions, and for Build, the Microsoft conference, there's also 2 or 3. There's a really interesting one called Introducing the New System Fonts, and it's about the new system font. San Francisco is the name, in the new version of iOS and new version of macOS. So they're gonna change the font, and this is an Italian guy. He explains why they changed it and what's the difference between like the font they will use on Apple Watch and the font that they use on the mobile operating system versus the desktop one. Another interesting example or interesting way to do UI research, and then it's fun to call it research, well actually it's playing games, is video games. So I can really wonder why people sometimes make decisions. Like for example, in a game called The Elder Scrolls Skyrim, they went for this really minimal UI, and then the game before that, Elder Scrolls 4, it's kind of like a very adorned UI with wood elements, and there's like paper going on. So I wonder, for a fantasy game, what is appropriate and what is good. There's a trend these days for a very minimal design, but I find that the old trend for a very adorned design kind of works better, especially for the things you only use a few times. Like for example, that train ticketing machine, like you're really able to see where is the button. There's some interesting UI in Borderlands. It's kind of like a perspective-based UI, and I love checking out how different games do it. So for example, this is an older one. It's Colin McRae Rally, but at the time I played it, years after this, I still remember it as being kind of like a very minimal UI, and it was kind of way ahead of its time in terms of animation and in terms of like how the screens were laid out. It's 4:3 and kind of ugly, but in a way it was very interesting compared to what was there at the time. I like to see films and just to check out the UI in the film. So I will put on like a bad Marvel movie just to see the parts where they show the 3D and the kind of fictive UI that they came up with. So that's also an inspiration for me. But of course, I don't really design spaceships, so I can't really use it in my work. And I think I'm already talking for 25-30 minutes, so we should ramp up. So this UI discussion part, we will leave it for a next talk. There's a ton of resources. I will put the talk on our website. So thanks for listening.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Come on.
So one of the things that I had was, how have you found juggling all the different UI kind of requirements from various different companies? So you gave Apple and Google as an example, and you've now got Microsoft with the Surface, the Windows 10 interactions in the mix as well, and Metro.
Yeah, it's a very it's a very tough question because it's a very difficult answer. So kind of a company like Google tries to enforce their style also onto iOS. So they have a kind of style that they invent for Google Maps and Inbox, and it's kind of material design that they impose on iOS. And for example, Microsoft does the same with Office. So they're like kind of invading the other operating system with their style, and then depending on the project, the client, it makes sense to either really follow the guidelines of one if it's a single platform app, but if it's a multi-platform app, it's really debatable if you should follow all of the UI guidelines, because that's kind of like what the other part was about, like, are the UI guidelines really good? So one of the slides I have here is that there's like this is supposed to be a button, this thing, but it's not really a button. And then another one is that Microsoft recommends hiding icon labels in the newest version of Windows 10 on command bars. So there's all these icons in the drawing app, but like maybe the last one means delete and the other one rotate, but I don't really know what all of them mean. So that's kind of like they give you advice, but it's not always good advice. So I find that it's better to draw on your knowledge as a UI designer combined with the guidelines to get to a good end result. Okay.
Between managing all these different operating systems, you have Google's material design, you have Apple's design, you have Microsoft design, and then you also have to deal with web design as well. In addition to all that, you have the different countries which you're targeting. How do you find to balance all of these like different ways? Because I noticed that there's a lot of Japanese apps that are a lot different from the American apps that I'm used to. And I know that the company that I work for hasn't really considered going through all the other countries that we're going to expand to yet. I was wondering how often do you have to change the designs normally, and like what certain aspects you have to change, at least going to Japan since we're here right now compared to America?
Yeah, most of our clients are Belgium, so we don't really encounter a lot of these issues except just translation, where UI has to be translatable, every element has to be stretchable. But you mentioned the web, and it's an interesting thing, because on the web there's really no concept as like a unified UI. There is no guide on how to design for the web, but design has for long been guided by really the technical constraints, so what you can realistically do at the web. So now you can use a lot of custom fonts, and people start doing it, even though it's maybe a bad idea for like loading times or performance. And one interesting aspect, or what I prefer, if a client doesn't have like a global budget, they don't have, and this is the case even for like usually very rich clients, they don't have the budget to make an Android specific client, an iOS specific client, a Windows specific client, a good website and web application. Like they don't have the resources to do this, then I recommend these days that they do it a bit like Slack, where you kind of use a container which is just a website to put a web application inside, and then you're kind of free to do UI wise what you want. You just have to follow like user expectations, I guess. It's really hard to do cross-platform in a right way. So if you have to do it for everything, I recommend just making a good UI that is based on the web, and then if you're budget constrained to make native clients, just keep it to this and wrap it in a native app container.
Are you interested in smartwatch design? For example, Android Wear, Apple Watch?
Yeah, I'm interested in it, but mostly from a business perspective. So when Google Glass came out, I thought it would be interesting, like if you're working in a shipyard, to see the ships coming in and you can just keep doing your work. But there's a lot of mostly like battery constraints and networking constraints at the moment. So I think the technology will be interesting in a few years, but now it's just too immature. You're running around with a watch that doesn't even last a full day. So yeah, it's not enough at the moment, but it will be in a few years, and I think there's going to be interesting business opportunities with what is in Japan usually called IoT.
That's great.
Okay.
So thanks.
Thank you.
So great. We'll take a 10-minute break.
Yep.
And then we'll do around the room if anyone has anything to share, and then we'll have a second presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great.
Thanks, man. That's great.